a week from this weekend, and you're going to be one of the guests there. And
one of the guests. If I'm not the main guest, I'm not going.
Really, just forget it. Let's get it out of here. Well, okay, let's just start off talking about your own personal favorites. I'd kind of be interested in your own personal favorite artist and, a favorite comic if you have one.
Oh, are you going to be frustrated?
Let's hear it.
I never mention my favorite artist because there's no way I can do it without offending a million others. So I can't tell you that.
Oh, well, that's quite all right.
If I say Joe Blow is my favorite, then John Doe is going to be upset.
Yeah, well, sure.
You can understand that.
Well, now, a lot of people, of course, other than kids, collect comic books. Mm-hmm. Do you yourself have any special type of thing that you like to collect, whether it's movie material or comics?
No. I used to collect the ones I wrote just to keep them on file.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, I couldn't do it because there were too many of them. I'm sorry now that I didn't, because I didn't know years ago that they might be worth something years later.
Well, I was looking at a guidebook, and like an original Fantastic Four Spider-Man in mint condition can run you $1,000.
I wish I had one.
Well, when you really got around early in the 60s when Marvel Comics started developing some of their heroes, it was a departure from the traditional superhero. Do you have any comments on that, how you kind of were instrumental in the modern superhero?
No, that I can talk about.
Okay.
What I tried to do was do them differently than they had been done before. I wanted to get out of comics. I had been in comics for years, and I was sick of it. I felt I'm doing the same thing all over again, And my wife said to me, Stan, before you quit, why don't you try a bunch of books the way you would like to do them instead of the way the publisher always told you to do them? What have you got to lose? You're going to quit anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured, what the heck? And when we did Fantastic Four, I said, I want to do a team of superheroes, but I want to make them different than other teams. I want them to have problems and let them argue amongst themselves, and they're not always happy, and they don't even always win. And we'll try to put them in the real world instead of having them live in Gotham City or Metropolis. We'll let them live in New York on the East Side, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
If Johnny Storm drives a car, let him drive a Chevy Corvette and not a Whiz-Bang 8. And if they go to the movies, they'll go to the Radio City Music Hall or Lowe's State, or they won't go to the Bijou or something. And I try to make it as realistic as possible, where they worry about paying the rent. And instead of the hero just having a girlfriend, I made her his fiancée, and then later on they got married. And the kid, Johnny Storm, became the brother-in-law and so forth. And I tried to do the dialogue also the way real people might talk. I try to give them each their own personality. Up until then, for the most part, in comic books, when the characters would talk, it was all the same. The dialogue was interchangeable. A hero would be walking down the street and he'd say something like, "Oh, somebody's robbing a bank. I'd better catch him before he gets away." It was that level of dialogue, and I tried to change that. And I would try to write the kind of lines that even if you weren't looking at the picture, when you read the words, you would automatically know who had said it because they all spoke distinctively. And I was just doing it to get it out of my system. I never thought that it would catch on the way it did.
Mm-hmm.
But we were lucky, and the kids seemed to like it. And what was even more important, the older readers seemed to like it. And we ended up grabbing a whole new age group. We started getting the older high school and the college readers.
How about characters like Ben Grimm or Bruce Tanner that are traditionally anti-heroes?
Uh-huh.
Well, how did those come about?
Same thing. It's not that they were anti-heroes. It's just, again, I was trying to be realistic. Now, Ben Grimm turned into really a monster. And I figured, well, if a real person, if I turned into a monster, I sure as hell wouldn't be cheerful about it. I wouldn't be happy. And I'd have a chip on my shoulder. I'd feel that, why did I get a lousy break like that? Why me? So I tried to write him that way, where he's likable, he's a good guy, but he's angry all the time. And he's ready to explode at any minute. Readers like those kind of characters. People hate goody-goody characters, you know. As far as Bruce Banner, the same thing. He became the Hulk. And I figured it'll be, well, really, I took the Hulk. It was a combination of Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. A combination of the Frankenstein monster, I should say, Jekyll and Hyde. And I figured, here's a guy who turns into a monster. He's not going to be happy about that, and he'll spend his life trying to cure himself. And what that did, it gave the stories an extra dimension. Instead of the hero merely fighting the bad guy, the hero is also fighting his own personal devils, which are plaguing him. And I think that made the stories more interesting to a reader.
Let me ask you about a couple other characters, Sergeant Fury and the Silver Surfer.
Well, Sergeant Fury, the same thing applied. Really, I did that book on a bet. By the time we did Sergeant Fury, we had a lot of titles, and they were all selling well. We had Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Thor, Daredevil, Iron Man, all of that group. And my publisher was saying, I don't understand why these books are selling so well. What is there? It must be the titles. You must be coming up with good names. And I said, it's not the titles. I think it's the style. We're giving the kids a style they haven't really read before. My publisher couldn't quite believe that, or I don't think he understood really what I was saying. And I said, I'll prove it to you. I think we could publish any kind of book, and if we do that style, do it in that style, it'll sell. So we made a bet. I said to him, you tell me what kind of book would have no chance of selling if we brought it out today. What's the worst subject you could find for comic books? And this was in the days of, I forget, Korea or Vietnam or one of those very unpopular wars.
Sure.
He said, a war magazine, because nobody is interested, nobody would buy it. I said, okay, we'll do one, but we'll do it in the Marvel style, and I bet it'll sell. We did Sergeant Fury, and I wrote somewhere in the book, the war magazine for people who hate war magazines, because I hate them myself. And I tried to do it in a very human way, make the characters real, and I think it was the first comic book that had an all-ethnic group. We had an Italian guy, Dino Manelli. We had a Jewish guy, Izzy Cohen. We had Gabriel Jones, a black man, and on and on. And they would fight among themselves and complain. And I tried to remember the way it was when I was in the war and the way we talked and acted. And it was sort of, I guess, the precursor of the movie Platoon today.
Sure, right.
But at any rate, it worked, and that sold well. And there was a lot of humor in it, because I find it tough to write anything that doesn't have some humor in it somewhere. And that was Sergeant Fury. What was the other one you asked about?
Well, Silver Surfer.
Silver Surfer was a little different. Jack Kirby, the artist I was working with, had drawn him in one of the stories, a Fantastic Four story. Jack and I had planned to do a character called Galactus. And we never mentioned the Silver Surfer, but when he drew the strip, he had this guy, this nutty-looking guy on a flying surfboard. And I said, who's he? And Jack said, I figured a guy as powerful as Galactus ought to have a herald to fly ahead of him and find planets for him. And I said, hey, that's a great idea. And I kept looking at the character and looking at him. I don't remember who came up with the name. I think Jack may have had the name The Surfer, and I may have said, let's call him the Silver Surfer, but it isn't clear in my memory. But anyway, he looked so noble the way he was drawn that I decided not to make him just an ordinary hero on a flying surfboard. And I tried to write him as if there was something almost biblical about him, or something super noble, super heroic. Almost, I guess I wasn't thinking of it consciously at the time, but when I would lecture at colleges, the kids would say to me, did you have Jesus Christ in mind when you did the Surfer? Because he reminds us there's something Christ-like about his attitude. And I always say yes, but if I thought of that, it was subconscious. But at any rate, I wanted to make him that type of a being who personifies goodness. And And a number of people said to me, I'm crazy. They said, nobody wants to read about somebody like that. They'll think it's corny. And I said, come on. People would love a character that sort of mouths the feelings that many of us have but might be too embarrassed to say them. And apparently I was right, because he became one of our most popular characters.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about your history with Marvel? Because I know that you essentially left the East Coast to come out to the West Coast to try to, as the television series got more popular, and then recently New World Pictures bought out Marvel, correct?
Right.
What is your opinion on that, or your story on that?
Well, as far as New World Pictures, I'm the happiest guy on earth, because I came out here about 7 years ago. We started an animation studio to do Saturday morning cartoons and whatever else we could do in animation, and I came to help. And we did pretty good. We had a lot of shows on TV and so forth, but the one thing we couldn't really do was produce our own things. We had to either sell them to a network or get somebody else to help finance them, because we weren't really producers, you know?
Yes.
But with New World behind us, we now have a company that makes movies, that makes television shows, a company with a theatrical background and history and great ability, and they're a bunch of young, energetic, bright guys, and I think it's going to be terrific for Marvel. I think we're going to start having great impact in film from now on, the way we did in comic books some years ago.
Is there a film right now in preparation based on?
We have a number of them. There's Doctor Strange. There's a new one. Well, I don't know if I should give you the name or not, because it hasn't been announced yet, but it's an original concept. Mm-hmm. It's not really based on Marvel. It's an original idea we came up with, and we will do a Marvel comic, which will come out before the movie. See, that's another thing. We now have the ability to come out with original ideas and present them to New World, and then if New World wants to do movies or television series of these ideas, we can then do the comic books to buttress them, which is the opposite of what we were doing. We were just taking our comics and trying to sell them to producers.
Wasn't there talk of a Spider-Man movie that's been talked about for a few years? Yeah,
it's still in the works. It's still in the works. Spider-Man, Captain America, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. is in the works, and Doctor Strange, and the Fantastic Four. I think we'll be doing an X-Men movie. We'll probably do something soon with Daredevil. These things are all in the talking stages now at New World. They've only bought Marvel about 2 months ago or so, okay. So we're just now getting organized and deciding where we want to go and what priorities we want to give these projects.
Do you have a lot of input as far as the way the characters will be portrayed, or?
I expect to, since I'm out here and I'm sort of the liaison between Marvel Comics and the movie company.
Because wasn't there a Spider-Man TV show?
Oh, it was the worst.
Right, and it just didn't have any of the feeling.
In those days, that was an example of what I was talking about. In those days, all we were able to do, because we couldn't produce shows ourselves, so we licensed the show to another company. And I was here as a consultant, but I learned to my sorrow that being a consultant means you're allowed to consult and you're allowed to give your opinion, but nobody has to listen to you or do what you say. Mm-hmm. And I kept telling them how terrible I thought the show was, and they just patted me on the head as though, what do I know? And it was a big disappointment, and it was one of the reasons that we decided to move out here and open our own little studio and see what we could do. I figured if somebody is going to ruin the Marvel characters, we could probably do it as the same as anyone.
Sure.
We wouldn't do it any worse than anybody else, and hopefully we could do it better.
Now, you mentioned X-Men. That's your hottest selling comic book right now with Marvel.
frankly, our biggest decision right now is to whether to try to do it as a live-action motion picture, a live-action television series, or an animated film or an animated series.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're discussing at the moment.
Now, there are also...
combination.
There are also two new comics that are out, NAM and the New Universe Project.
Yeah.
Any comments on those?
Well, I really don't know what to say. NAM is quite a successful book. It's caused a lot of talk, and it's gone again. It did the type of thing I love Marvel to do. It went against the trend, and it went against the common wisdom, because people were saying nobody is going to buy a book about stories about Vietnam. Nobody cares about that. Just the way they told Stone when he wanted to sell his movie Platoon. Nobody cares about Vietnam. You won't get anybody to go in and see it. And I think the thing that I hate the most are the so-called experts who always seem to know what won't work until it's done and they're proven wrong. And NAM is a perfect example of that. I mean, we did it. It was really, it was done in New York by the Marvel staff. I mean, Jim Shooter and his staff have to get credit for that. I'm talking about it, but I wasn't the guy who did it. Although I would like to think I would have been the guy who did it if I were still there. Because I loved the book. I loved it the minute I saw it.
Now, Jim Shooter sort of took over the reins of Marvel on the East Coast when you went west, right?
Right.
Any comment about the New Universe Project? Is just another comic that,
Well, I've got my fingers crossed. Again, it was created by Jim and by Jim Shooter and the guys in New York, and I haven't had too much. I've been so busy here, I don't have too much time to read it carefully. I've thumbed through them, and I'm hoping that they're going to do very well. They look pretty good to me.
Well, listen, I think I've gotten some great stuff here for the interview.
Damn right.
Really? And I tell you, actually, what I'd like to do is get you all to send me a picture. Maybe I could talk to your secretary again and get her to send us a photo.
Oh, she'd be glad to, sure. The usual rate, I think they're $20 a dozen, and glossies, colors, and Pufia scrapbook. Listen, what paper is this for?
This is Public News. We're a weekly periodical in Houston. We have a circulation of about 25,000.
Oh.
And we're really more of a music and arts magazine.
You want me to hum a little bit?
What's that?
You want me to sing a song?
Sure. Unfortunately, wouldn't translate, but...
Well, we have papers like that here. Is it a giveaway paper?
Exactly, yes. It's distributed free, and it runs about 20 to 24 pages a week.
Oh, great. And it's probably read by the kind of hip young people.
Exactly. Your high school students and basically it's just a good calendar for people to find out what's happening during the week.
Love it. And you will, of course, send me thousands of copies, or at least one, so I can see what the article is.
Definitely. Let me be... well, I'll tell you, why don't you give me your secretary, and I'll be sure I've got the address to send that to. Okay?
Well, it was good talking to you.
It was a pleasure, Stan.
All right, thanks very much.
Certainly.
Lana, you want to pick up there? And he wants a photograph, so he'll give you the address and everything and tell you whatever has to be told. All right. See you again.
Okay, thanks again, Stan.
So long. You there, Lon?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Hello, yes.
Hi, Lonnie. Yes, I just wanted to get y'all's address so we could send a copy of the interview, and then perhaps if you could send us a photo.
Okay, how soon will you need this photo?
Actually, if we could have it by Monday.
Well, then we can't get you a new one because he's having a session today.
I see. Yes. See, we have
It would have to be an old one.
Okay. Something, just something, what you think would be the nicest one?
Well, there's only one.
Okay.
There is only one, and it's sort of grainy to be reproduced and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're having new ones taken.
Oh, I see.
But it'll be a while before the new ones are available, so you'll just, I guess, have to make do with the old one. And it's really kind of not all that great, but it's the only one we got.
I thought maybe you might have like a picture, maybe with some, artist designs in the background or something.
Yeah, there is a picture with him standing in front of a bunch of comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
But that's the one I'm talking about.
Okay, well, that's great.
Our address is You wanted our address?
Yeah, because I wanted to send a copy of the interview.
Okay. Marvel Productions, Stan Lee, 6007 Sepulveda Boulevard, Sepulveda.
6007 Sepulveda Boulevard.
Van Nuys, California.
I'm sorry.
Van Nuys,
Okay.
91411.
What is the correct way to spell Nyes? N-U-Y?
Nuy.